Understanding your Prism Select Online report. In this video we will cover the content of the Prism Select Online report. The front cover shows the name of the candidate and indicates the benchmark that has been selected for comparison. The following page shows the report contents. Section 1, the introduction. This provides information on how Select Online can provide a successful recruitment solution and looks at the impact of eligibility and suitability on the recruitment process. Section 2 contains the 8-dimensional Prism map and the dimension key points. The map and the dimensions are critical to understanding how a delegate may fit with a particular role. We will therefore look at both of these pages in detail. The map is also shown in Section 4 with guideline matches to the benchmark included. If you are not familiar with the Prism map, it is preferable to use this rather than the map in Section 2. Our video commentary will therefore move between Section 2 and Section 4 to ensure a good understanding of each. Prism is a neuroscience-based instrument specifically designed to identify the behavioural preferences that directly relate to personal relationships and work performance. To facilitate understanding, Prism uses colours to illustrate the behaviour preferences. Although the Prism model is a metaphor for brain functioning, the Prism maps represent the dynamic interaction that takes place within the brain, and is based on the principle that no one part of the brain does solely one thing, and no one part of the brain acts alone. All our thoughts, emotions and actions are results of many parts of the brain acting together. The Prism chart represents the relationship between the right hemisphere, which is the green and the blue quadrants, and the left hemisphere, the gold and the red quadrants. Red and gold preferences indicate how a person will tend to behave when engaged in a task and/or when under pressure to achieve results. Green and blue preferences indicate how a person will tend to behave in a social setting when establishing rapport with others. As the person switches between these two preferences, he or she may display very different, even opposite behaviours. Prism provides maps of an individual's behaviour. The two maps used for recruitment purposes are the underlying map and the benchmark map. The benchmark map indicates the behaviours that have been identified as being needed for the role, and this map is always in green. The underlying map, always in red, can be described as the real you, your natural inherent behaviour. It is therefore an indication of how you tend to behave when you are either totally relaxed or when you feel no need to manage or control your behaviour to present a different adaptive response to the world. It is your behavioural comfort zone, one you can operate in easily and effectively. So the two lines identify both the behaviours required for the role, the green line, and the candidate's natural behavioural preference, the red line. If both of these lines are in the same position, then the candidate will be an exact match behaviourally for the role. However, an exact match is highly unlikely, so there will always be differences. Whilst you can see at a glance that some behaviours are a close match, it is important to look at the whole map, so we will start by looking at the green quadrant. Greens love relating to and interacting with people in a positive and friendly environment. They need to have the opportunity to express their ideas and opinions. This helps them to achieve social recognition. If they are given the opportunity to create radical ideas, they will provide unlimited possibilities, and with such energetic enthusiasm that others will be drawn in by their infectious optimism. If they have the freedom to be innovative and do things their way, there is no doubt they will produce ingenious results. Some typical green behaviours: inspiring, creative, imaginative, persuasive, optimistic, lively, fast-paced, energetic, unconventional, adaptable, spontaneous, enthusiastic, free-spirited, and original. The green quadrant, like all quadrants, has two dimensions. The dimension key points provides a description of these. Let's move to Section 4 to start looking at these dimensions in more detail. So we are now looking at the map in Section 4. This is the same map as in Section 2, but now contains guidelines on matches to the benchmark. Innovating. A preference for creativity, imagination, abstract thinking, innovation, and the generation of new ideas. For this dimension, the benchmark requires a preference of 30. In other words, this behaviour is not required for the role. The candidate's underlying map indicates a score of 13, indicating that this is a weak or avoided behaviour. Statistically, this dimension is a moderate match for the role. However, as the job does not require this behaviour and the candidate has a very weak preference, this dimension would not cause any concern. Initiating. A preference for initiating contacts, networking, persuading others, selling ideas and juggling several tasks at the same time. Here, the benchmark requires a preference of 36, once again a behavioural preference not required for the role. The candidate has a very high preference at 95, meaning that whilst the candidate likes initiating contacts, networking, persuading others, etc., the job does not require this, and therefore it could be potentially counterproductive and is a mismatch with the role. It is important to note that on the surface it may appear as though a high score in initiating may be acceptable or even beneficial. However, it is important to note that if the role does not require a particular behaviour, in this case initiating, and the candidate has a high preference, then this could be potentially counterproductive. Why is this? Imagine you like networking, selling ideas, initiating contacts, but you're in a role where this is not required. Not only could this be highly frustrating, but it could also detract from more critical factors. Let's now then look at the blue quadrant, and we'll go back to section 2. Blues are team players who have a desire to please and maintain stability in a group, even if it means sacrificing their own personal goals. Blues are driven by harmony, agreement and loyalty. They prefer to keep things as they are and provide a stabilizing influence by the consistent way in which they go about their day-to-day work. They do well in handling routine matters. Change, therefore, is unwelcome. If they have a friendly, low-stress, slow-paced work environment, there is no doubt they will be happy, committed workers who will do their best to please those with whom they work. Typical blue behaviours: supportive, patient, caring, cooperative, dependable, kind, sensitive, slow-paced, laid-back, good listener, sympathetic, helpful, understanding, kind-hearted and unassuming. Let's move on to section 4 and look at the 2 dimensions in blue. Supporting. A preference for putting people at ease, building team spirit, mediating conflict, being empathetic and caring for others. For this dimension, the role requires a score of 72 and is classed as important to the role. The candidate has a score of 95, potentially a lot more than is required. However, it is quite possible the candidate could adapt this behaviour down, and this is therefore a likely mismatch rather than a complete mismatch. Coordinating. A preference for working cooperatively, seeking consensus, enabling others to take part and consulting others. The role requires 48 and is occasionally useful. Once again, the candidate has far more than is required at 92. And whilst the candidate could adapt this behaviour down, this amount of flex could be a challenge, and so this is marked as a mismatch. We'll now go back to section 2 to have a look at the red quadrant. Reds love to accept challenges, create action, and achieve results. They are driven to overcome opposition in order to accomplish goals. They are quick to seize opportunities that allow them to assume control of their environment. If they know that there are rewards and recognition available for those who produce the best results, they will be among the top performers. In pursuing their goals, Reds sometimes regard the opinions of others as obstacles rather than helpful suggestions. They possess a remarkable ability to thrive in difficult and demanding environments. Typical Red behaviours: forceful, competitive, hard-driving, decisive, demanding, challenging, independent, assertive, authoritative, fast-paced, energetic, determined, competitive, ambitious, and task-oriented. We'll now move to section 4 to have a look at the 2 dimensions in the red quadrant. Focusing. A preference for being forthright and outspoken, taking tough decisions, working in an aggressive environment. The role requires 42 and is marked as unhelpful or not relevant. The candidate scores really low at 7, so this is scored as a likely mismatch, as it is feasible a candidate could flex up to the required score. Delivering. a preference for taking charge, being assertive, meeting tight deadlines, working independently and being driven by a need to win. The role requires 84 and is critical for excellence. The candidate has a much lower score of 43 and this is therefore a mismatch. The candidate would find it very challenging indeed to adapt from 43 to 84. We'll now move on to the gold quadrant and go back to section 2. Golds are motivated not just by results but by quality results. They tend to be low-key, factual and extremely accurate. They are at their best when a job needs to be done with precision. Golds set high standards for themselves and others and expect everyone to comply, always with the same high standards. Part of their drive for quality, accuracy and order is derived from their strong desire for a structured environment. Golds prefer a logical step-by-step approach to tasks. For them, even life itself should proceed along a predictable path. They believe in themselves, their capabilities and their intellectual skills. They pride themselves on their ability to solve complex problems. Typical gold behaviours: cautious, methodical, precise, thorough, analytical, shrewd, quality-focused, detailed, accurate, meticulous, well-organised, logical, reserved, guarded and self-contained. Let's go to section 4 and look at the 2 dimensions. Finishing, the candidate's preference for paying attention to details, delivering quality and accuracy, being good at follow-through and following procedures. The role requires 90 and is critical for excellence in the role. The candidate also has a high score of 96, so this is a strong match. Evaluating, a preference for checking large amounts of complex data, analysing information, evaluating options and making dispassionate judgments. The role requires a score of 72 and is important to the role. The candidate's score is at 88, so a lot higher. But it is feasible the candidate could flex down, so this is marked as a moderate match. Having looked at the Prism map, the colours and the dimensions, let's move on to the other sections. Section 3. This contains a text narrative for the candidate. This can be particularly useful if your candidate requires feedback as part of the process. Please note, the text summary is based solely on the candidate's underlying line and deliberately excludes any reference to the benchmark. Section 4. As well as the Prism map which we have already looked at, Section 4 also contains the profile comparison chart. The chart is divided into 3 distinct areas: behavioural preference, work aptitudes and core traits, with the dimensions for all of these areas shown at the bottom. As always, the green line represents the benchmark and the red line the candidate. The top 3 factors determined by the benchmark are shown by the green triangle. The behavioural preference is exactly the same information as shown on the Prism map, and it is now shown in a graphical view, so you can use the graph or the map to understand the delegate's behavioural preference. The candidate's work aptitudes and the variance to the benchmark are shown on the graph and are also explained in more detail on the following pages. So viewing the graph, you can see that for the top 3 factors in the behavioural preference, the candidate is close to the benchmark and therefore a match on finishing and evaluating, but the candidate is not so close on delivering, which is a mismatch. We already know this information from viewing the Prism map. The same principle applies to the work aptitudes. The candidate is close and therefore a match on orderly and efficient, but is somewhere adrift from the benchmark on the other top factors: competitive and entrepreneurial, and social and empathetic. These are a mismatch. The core traits follows the same principle. So what does this all mean? Quite simply, the further away from the benchmark on the top factors, the less likely the candidate is to be suitable for the role. So any variances should be considered carefully and explored at interview if possible. More information on all the areas on the graph can be found in the benchmark planner. Section 5 contains further information regarding the work aptitudes and the work environment performance predictions. The work environment performance predictions provides an overview of the extent to which the candidate's performance is likely to be affected by different work environments. Their success will depend on the extent of a match between them and the work environment. Having a positive alignment between the employee and the work environment benefits the organisation in many ways. Benefits include higher levels of productivity and lower turnover. The closer the match between people and their work environment, the more they enjoy and value their work. So this candidate's performance is likely to be enhanced in a work environment where there is a need to influence, persuade, or negotiate win-win solutions rather than to exercise formal authority over others. And also where work takes place at a low or steady pace and where getting things done is more important than meeting deadlines. Likewise, their performance is likely to be inhibited where creativity, imagination, innovation and abstract thinking are encouraged and where there is little requirement to follow a format previously developed by others. Section 7. Career Development Analysis. This part of the report highlights 26 business-related activities for career development. Each key area is divided into a number of subsections. For example, on the first area of team working, the low preference is described as formal and reserved, prefers to work alone without interruption. And on the high preference, prefers work that involves social interaction, like supporting others and getting them involved. The benchmark range is shown as 45 to 75 by the green bar, and the candidate's preference is shown by the red triangle. The conclusion is that a candidate is a moderate fit with the benchmark for team working. However, if we look at social skills, we can see that the candidate has a higher preference for talkative, optimistic, expressive and lively, enjoys socializing and meeting new people than the benchmark range, and this will be considered a mismatch. It is important to note that career development analysis is supplementary and drills down on information already contained in the report. Whilst not critical to a recruitment decision, it may be worthwhile reviewing the factors for large differences. This concludes the video for the Select Online report.